Good afternoon and welcome to our COVID-19 briefing on the university's budget and financial status. I'm Robin Kaler, Associate Chancellor for Public Affairs, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Let me start by introducing our three panelists, Chancellor Robert Jones, Provost Andreas Kangelaris, and Associate Chancellor for Budget and Resource Planning, Paul Ellinger. Thanks for joining us for this first in a series of live-streamed COVID-19 briefings we'll be holding over the summer. These will be linked to the COVID-19 working teams that are helping guide our university operations throughout the duration of the pandemic. Our next briefing will be this Tuesday, June 9th at noon, and will focus on the draft report by the academics team discussing the possible scenarios for fall instruction. Chancellor Jones and Provost Kangelaris will be back for that one, and they'll be joined by Vice Provost Kevin Pitts and Vice Provost Bill Bernard. You'll be able to watch that briefing and all future briefings using the same link that you're using today. They'll also be recorded and posted to the covid19.illinois.edu website. Although the topics and participants will vary each time, these sessions will all generally follow the format you'll see today. We'll start with some opening comments, and then we'll move to asking the panelists questions solicited from members of the campus community in advance. For today's session, I'll be posing to Robert, Paul, and Andreas questions that came to us from business and finance staff from across the university. We can't cover all of those submitted in an hour, but we were able to go through and find a list of those that seem to be the most frequently asked. So with the ground rules explained, let's get started with today's COVID-19 briefing on our budget and financial status. Chancellor Jones, would you like to offer some opening thoughts?
Yes, I would, Robin. Let me start by saying, first of all, thanks to you for hosting this briefing. And of course, I'd like to thank Provost Andreas Kangelaris and Associate Chancellor Paul Ellinger for joining us for this briefing as well. Let me just start by saying I think we all would agree that these first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the focus for all of us has been on our community. How do we assure the health and well-being of our community, at the same time finding ways to navigate a semester that forced a massive and sudden change in almost every aspect of our operation, and how to do that in real time and how to do it effectively. And I'd just like to applaud our faculty and staff for being best in class in terms of how quickly they turned this university on a dime to prepare us to move away from face-to-face instruction. And I particularly want to give a lot of that credit to Provost Andreas Kangelaris, our Chief Academic Officer, for the way that he worked with the faculty and the deans and the entire university to bring that into being. But I also want to give credit to Paul and his team, along with a dozen of other business and financial professionals across the campus, who have been taking a very careful look at the financial implications. And they started to look at the implications of COVID-19 even before our spring semester opened. They have been managing our resources in a way that has allowed us to immediately respond to the demands of the crisis, but they also have been working on contingency plans that are based on projections of our future needs. And I can tell you folks, in the middle of a crisis, this is the kind of broad-based strategic thinking that is needed from a financial perspective. And as we move further along, we started to see really stark evidence of the profound economic impact of this global crisis on individuals, on families, on communities, on states and nation, as well as on this university. While this is certainly a public health crisis, I think we all would agree that it is also very, very clear that it is causing some significant financial challenges and causing a financial environment that I think that will be with us for some time to come. So we wanted to use this briefing to talk about some of those plans that are under consideration today, and just to give you a perspective of how we are working through as many of those considerations as we move forward. The state legislature's action to provide state funding at the same level as last year was certainly very, very welcoming news. And I think in many ways, a vote of confidence in our institution. The funding bill still awaits governor's approval, but I think we also understand that with this pandemic, massive negative impacts have been brought to bear on the state, the nation, and the global economies. And we realize that the state faces significant economic and cash flow challenges. The experience with the budget impasse of 2016 and 2017, and I remind you, 2016 was the year that I decided to join this university. We saw cash flow issues caused by significant delays in state payments that ultimately created a budget shortfall of about $189 million in state funding. And I know for many of us, this pandemic and the financial crisis associated with it brings back very vivid memories of 2016, 2017, the 25 months that we went without a complete budget. So we must expect that the financial impact from COVID-19 will affect all major sources of revenue and all campus units across all of our mission. And given that it's very difficult and hard to predict how long this pandemic will last, its financial implications will have lingering effects. And so therefore, we must begin to consider scenarios for how we mitigate the physical challenges and how we implement a recovery plan for this university, because this financial implications will more than likely continue for several years to come. Certainly the budget news from the state was much better than we had anticipated, but we are certainly in the early stages of a very challenging budgetary environment, and navigating our way through it in a manner that protects the integrity of our core mission will require determination, patience, cooperations, collaboration, physical discipline across every unit, across every college of this university. I think that this collective approach and careful stewardship and careful planning will help us navigate the shortfalls that at times, that the shortfalls in ways that we were able to navigate them a few years ago. Our careful and thoughtful planning will also allow us to respond quickly, strategically, and efficiently to the uncertain financial landscape. And we certainly must be able to efficiently and successfully navigate this in the months and the years ahead. But before I turn things over to Paul for him to give us his budget overview, and we start to work through the questions that have been posed, I just want to take just a moment to remind everyone of the values that have always guided our financial planning and decision-making that we make at this universities, and the actions that we take to implement those decisions and strategies. I think these add an important context to the rest of our discussion today. I remind you that we are the state's only public land-grant comprehensive research university. We are the flagship university for the state of Illinois, and that comes with a fundamental set of responsibility for us to continue to deliver a world-class education at an affordable price to every qualified Illinois resident who choose to come to this great university. COVID-19 has not lessened or relaxed that obligation for us. In fact, in many ways, I believe that it has intensified it. Now more than ever, we are challenged, I believe, to quickly find ways to make our educational experiences accessible and certainly affordable. But we must also act in ways that recognizes the market, governmental, and operation and physical realities, constraints that exist in our nation and our state. We must be careful stewards of the public resources that have been invested in us, and we must operate in ways that are sustainable, physically responsible over the long term. Our state is going to need us this year, as they really have demonstrated the need for us in the last several months. And it's just been gratifying to see how the land grant mission really has come to play during this crisis to help the state manage this crisis in the best way possible. So I commend each and every one of you for the role that you played in that regard. So the state has needed us really desperately over the last several months, and they're going to need us even more in 10, 20, 50 years from now. And so I just think it's critically important that we not lose sight of that. And finally, the decision we make recognize that we have multiple missions here at this university: our education, our scholarship, public engagement, and driving economic and social development are absolutely essential components of that mission. And each of those missions are multiple layered, and they have multiple dimensions. The decisions and the actions that we're going to talk about today are really intended to maximize our ability to support and to grow all of the dimensions of our mission. I just want to end by reminding every one of you that we have been through enormous financial difficulties and situations in the past. And I think we came out of those situations a much stronger, much more sustainable institution and better able to deliver on our promise that we made to the state of Illinois. So I truly believe we will find our way through this with the same creativity and the same success that we've demonstrated in the past. So with that, let me say on behalf of the entire university community, thank you for joining us today. And I will now let Robin get us started with the rest of this critical conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. Before we move to the questions, we thought it might be helpful to those of you watching to have Paul Ellinger offer a very brief overview of some of the key factors that go into our budget and financial decisions, and to remind all of us where our revenues come from and broadly where they are directed. Paul, can I ask you to quickly walk us through that?
Sure. Thanks, Robin. So we're going to take the next few minutes just to do a deeper dive on some of the financial impacts, as well as some of the strategies that we're employing. So just an overview of the financial impact to date. We're looking at, we have our impacts served in 3 separate buckets. The first bucket is looking at our fee adjustments that we made for our students and some of the refunds we had to do for some of our programs. And we were about halfway through our spring semester when this happened, so we made approximately a 50% fee adjustment for our students. So if we look at the housing, food service, and student services, that was about $30 million of the $36 million on the fee adjustment bucket. Then looking over into the second bucket, which is additional cost, we immediately went out and purchased hardware for students and staff to make sure that we could go online effectively and also work remotely effectively. We also purchased some software for online delivery of our programs. And many of you are aware of some of the innovative research that was done at the same time, our rapid vent and so forth. Some of our costs went into that as well. And I'll talk just a little bit later about we are providing some support for our summer graduate students who are unable to return, and as well as Summer Online Teaching Academy. And the final bucket that we look at is basically the lost revenue. So some of the programs, the first area was summer tuition. Some of our programs require face-to-face, and we had to delay the delivery of those programs. And since we went online for the summer, There's quite a bit of reductions related to the housing, dining, concessions because there are fewer people on campus. We had to cancel our sports, music, STEM, and other youth camps. We didn't assess parking and athletics. Our spring events were canceled, as well as some of you may be aware that we have a lot of Union and Allerton. We rent a lot of facilities for the outside people. And also our vet hospital had a lot of clinical revenues that we were unable to acquire. So how are we addressing this gap? So we were very fortunate to receive CARES monies, approximately $31.4 million came to the University of Illinois at Urbana. And the requirements of that was half of it was to be used for students in an emergency fund context. And the other half that I'm showing on this screen is we were allowed to use for some of our institutional support. So as we look at housing and auxiliaries and so forth, we're able to support some of that. But you can see that there still remains a significant gap after the federal funding, which is about $65 million. And so we have to use our reserves, reduce costs to be able to meet that funding gap. Just a quick overview. We could spend a lot of time on this, and I just want to give you a broad overview of kind of where our resources that we do receive on a campus like this. Because we get a lot of questions related to, for example, state appropriations. We got a state appropriations. Is that just, do we not have to have budget reductions now? So the answer to that is sort of twofold. First is it's 10% of our overall budget. So when we look at the standpoint of even if that number is flat, there's a lot of other potential changes that could occur across the other buckets. The other part is, and it's what Robert addressed as well, is we are dealing with a very fiscal economic time frame for both the state and the nation. Approximately 70% of our revenue from the state of Illinois comes through income taxes and sales taxes, and those have been severely impacted here through this crisis. And we realize that there's going to be fiscal challenges at the state level here, so we have to look at the short-term and long-term implications of the stability of that as well. And you can see a large portion of this comes through tuition as well. 35% of our overall budget. Institutional funds would be the overhead that we receive on grants and contracts for the most part. And then on the orange side, going clockwise, is our sponsored research and federal appropriations, which is still going strong. They're excited to potentially get back to work. Our gifts and endowments of 6%. And something that we don't often talk about in budget meetings is the auxiliary and departmental activities, the last remaining 20%. And this is an area that will be hit substantially by this. So this would be housing, this would be athletics, this would be the campus rec and so forth. And as we look at the sources there, they're significantly challenged in that as well. And one more comment on this slide, you see there's orange and blue. The blue side is what we have, we call them technically unrestricted funds. There's more flexibility in using those for different areas on campus, whereas the orange slices are pretty much targeted towards the area of where we receive the funds. Federal appropriations and grants need to be returned back to research. Gifts and endowments typically have donor intent, and auxiliaries, the housing revenue typically goes back to housing. So the challenge is that as we look at this and that as well, my background is in financial modeling, and when you look at you usually like to have a playbook for these, or you like to have data. We're dealing in an environment where we don't have a lot of data. We haven't gone through something like this before, and so when we look at the considerable financial uncertainty moving forward, there's the various blue circles that you're looking at here are different areas that probably have different types of variability related to them, and so. When going quickly around the clock here, If you look at the increased cost, what we're going to have with cleaning, PPE, building renovations, testing and tracing, and a lot of other costs that's going to be associated with this. This is, again, we've got some parameters here, but we don't necessarily know the impact that those are going to have. And then the uncertainty of tuition revenues. And this is something that we've done a lot of analysis on, but we don't have a lot of data on what students that will be arriving if we are going to go face to face. What's the impact on students, whether it be international students, whether it be domestic students, whether it be returning students. What are the challenges that we have related to them coming in? And you saw on the previous slide, that's about $800 million is what we get from tuition revenues. And so just a 10% change in that is $80 million in that as well. So then on the financial aid need, we've been very aggressive these last few years of investing heavily in financial aid, and more than $100 million a year with our Illinois commitment and other programs that we have. But the financial challenges by the students and parents, we're going to see considerable needs potentially growing here this next year as well. And we need to make sure that we have resources available to sort of help with that. Events, camps, and conferences. We're a comprehensive university that do a substantial amount of, we host many events, we host many conferences, and we don't know under what conditions those will occur here over the next year. The same thing with our performing arts and museums places, what we can do with Krannert and Krannert Art Museum and Spurlock, and what challenges that they're going to have related to this. And moving around, housing and dining. Again, they're looking very carefully at what conditions we would need to have for the housing and dining area, what areas we need to have if we have isolation, whether we have other types of issues related to this. They have a very effective team that's looking through a lot of different options and scenarios. And then keep going around the campus rec and other auxiliaries. What's it like with our campus rec facilities? What's it like with the Illini Union and some of the issues related to those areas? And finally, athletics. We get a lot of questions related to athletics. Josh has been very public in talking about these in various venues. He meets daily with his team to talk about the different scenarios that they have and run through different scenarios. He has a great mind for budgeting, and he's got a great team that do that, and they're in constant contact with us about the issues related to this. So the highlight is we have a very complex network of activities here. It's not necessarily just teaching and students, but a complex set of activities, and each one of these areas have challenges related to the revenue and costs associated with this. And so we have to look at these independently, and then we have to look at them all together. So what we need is then a nimble strategy to be able to look at moving forward to how to manage this. We like to say, I know when we talk about budget modeling, we like to say we take no right turns, but we have to be flexible enough now in this environment to be able to have enough flexibility, enough liquidity, enough opportunities to have to shift if we need to because of issues related to this. So we have to have a set of strategies that we may need to change over time. But this is a listing of some of the strategies that we're employing this year and this next academic year. Cost control and cost avoidance is a big part of our strategy. So we're starting with no merit-based salary program for the upcoming year. We still will be doing issues related to promotions and so forth. We're going to postpone capital projects and only strategic vital projects in addition to the ones that we have ongoing. We have a program, a strategic investment pool called Investment for Growth, that we're going to pause on issuing those funds, as well as a lot of initiatives that we put together in our strategic planning process here over the last couple of years. We're going to pause those investments until we get better clarity on the budget moving forward. Then on the recurring budget, we will likely see reductions for our centrally budgeted units for issues related to this coming year, again with the flexibility that we may need to use those resources to fill various holes. Our tuition units, we have with our new budget model called the Integrated Value Center Budget Model. The model will actually dictate to some degree what changes will occur related to the resources. And then we'll do something called cash rescissions for all units, where we'll ask all units to put some money aside, comparable to putting it in a savings account that they can't use for other types of resources, with the idea that we might have to use those to fill some of those gaps that may occur. And finally, just really look at recurring funding and hiring requests to be closely scrutinized. We've issued a set of guidelines for hiring, and that different units must make before they would receive funding. And we wanted them to prioritize these type of investments. So I summarized at the bottom of the slide the investments that we really think that we're prioritizing as we look at not only budget increases, but also budget decreases. What things are mission critical to this campus, including student safety, health and wellness, student success and accessibility, continuing the on-course delivery, blended learning investments in this area, critical public engagement and community engagement activities, as well as regulatory compliance, data security, and critical campus infrastructure. Regulatory compliance could be things related to the research enterprise, it could be the environmental side, or it could be as simple as making sure that we're complying with the increase in the minimum wage requirements. So these are things that we pay close attention to. I'll close by reminding folks what we've really done recently to sort of move some of the investments we have. Again, we've invested approximately $12 million, or will be investing through this emergency CARES program, and this is primarily the first half of the CARES program that came from the federal government. Again, the financial aid office should be applauded because these were in $1,000 grants, and so if you do the math about how many people that they had to review and get this money out in a very effective way, it was done very efficiently. And then another $5 million is used to support graduate fellowships this summer, looking at opportunities for graduate students who were unable to return. And so we've made this investment in our graduate programs. And finally, we're launching on Tuesday next week something called the Summer Online Teaching Academy, which is to learn from some of the activities that we went online this last year, look at some best practices, and work with faculty and students and staff to try to enhance our ability to move things through a blended online learning environment. So that's a quick overview, Robin. I'll turn it back over to you now to go to the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That was very thorough, and I know it answered a lot of the questions people have, so thank you very much. So let's get right into the other ones. And I have to say, I'm so glad that we've gotten this question several times. And Andreas, this one's going to be for you, but again, anybody feel free to chime in when you want. Feel free to have a conversation among the three of you, and we will just all listen. So this question we got says, I know COVID-19 is affecting our financial situation across the university. What can I do? What is our call to action?
Thank you, Robin. I'll be happy to answer this question. Let me start by saying that the first thing that each one of us needs to do is to stay safe. I think it is very important for us to emphasize the basic guidelines that are provided to us by our health experts, and that is our self-care, and safety is the self-care of the community. And that is the #1 thing that we need. The second thing that we need is determination. You know, for an institution like ours, closing down is not an option. We are the heart of everything that not only the state, but the nation needs right now. Education, research. I mean, we're dealing with a virus that we know very little about, and the state, the government in the state and the nation depend on us to understand the virus, to understand how to deal with the virus, to assess how the virus impacts the communities in which we live, and help everybody move forward in a way that will protect not only lives, but livelihoods as well. And of course, that is another part of our mission, economic prosperity. We are the public research university that this state turns over and over again to for help looking after the well-being of the state. So determination is very important. Our students know that, and I'm talking both our undergraduate and graduate students, and what they want from each and every one of us is to provide that leadership in terms of being determined to see us through these difficulties. The second thing is confidence. As the Chancellor said, it is not the first time in the last 20 years that this university went through some serious financial hardships. The recession of the 2007-2009, a major blow to the nation. We were able to weather the recession well. The recession, the state budget impasse of 2016 to 2018, we were able to deal with that as well. And that determination, I think, comes from the fact that we are very good at always prioritizing what is our core mission, and that is education, looking after our people, and making sure that our research mission and our mission of community engagement and economic prosperity for the state are the ones we always embrace. And patience is the third thing that I will ask for everyone to consider. This is a different crisis. And you know what they say? They say that the less you know, the more fearful you are about the enemy you fight. And that is why we need to be very patient. We are making progress. We are understanding the virus little by little. I'm very confident in our ability to be able to put forward, not only for this community, but for the entire state and beyond, the protocol that we need to be able, all of us, to do our part to deal with the hardships that we are faced with. And once we have those, the next thing I would like to ask from everyone is the willingness to come together and collaborate. At the unit level, we need to be thinking of what each one of the units can do for the other units, because each unit on this campus, being such a comprehensive campus, has a role to play. And as we all come together and we understand what each one of us brings to the table at the unit level, the college level, the centrally funded unit level, once we understand how each and every one of our assets contributes to the well-being of all, and we share and collaborate in dealing with the hardship and the challenges, I think not only our confidence will continue to build, but our success is guaranteed.
Great, thank you very much. Next question is for the Chancellor. Are you planning furloughs, layoffs, a hiring freeze, pay cuts, early retirement offers, anything like that?
Well, let me start by first of all saying that our thinking is that the best way to manage this crisis is that we have to think strategically. I've never, across almost 42 years of higher education experience, I've been a big fan of across the board budget adjustments in a time of a financial crisis. And certainly that is not the strategy, not the approach that we have decided to take at this juncture. Given all the financial factors that Paul mentioned earlier, we're not planning to do furloughs. We're not doing pay cuts other than at my central leadership team level that you probably have heard about. And we're not doing a lot of those things that some of our peers have decided that is in their best interest. And I think it's important to emphasize at this juncture that you can't really extrapolate from what one university is doing to assume that that's the right thing for another university. Because fortunately, each of us find ourselves in very unique environments, in states that are unique with unique budgetary challenges. So given the fact that we've had a long history, as I said earlier, and as Andreas and both Paul repeated, we've managed our resources very well for decades at this university. So much so that we were able to manage the 25-month budget impasse without it having a significant impact on our faculty and our staff and our students, other than the reputational impact that it had and making it more difficult to recruit people. So we know that we're not out of the woods necessarily with the budget for the rest of the fiscal year. And so I want to emphasize that at this juncture, none of the things that were asked about or part of our strategy, and we will work very hard to look at all other scenarios in order to prevent us from having to exercise those other options. And they will only be put in place as a last resort. So it's not part of our current planning, will only come into consideration as a last ditch measure to try to maintain our financial stability so that we can still carry out our mission, notwithstanding this pandemic, but post this pandemic.
Thank you very much. So Paul, you did mention rescissions though, and as the Chancellor just said, there could be some budget cuts. How would you decide what to cut, and how will you ensure that different areas and programs aren't affected unfairly?
Thanks, Robin. I, in principles, really agree with what the Chancellor and the Provost and even most companies would as well, is that across the board cuts are not the most strategic. And so what we're looking at is initially looking at whether it be strategic reductions or strategic investments. And so it takes more care, it takes more transparency, it takes more collaboration to do these kind of reductions and rescissions. We have a little bit of a blueprint of this before, again, doing this through the program with the budget impasse. We also have certain things that we do. We go out and protect the certain areas that we really can't have budget reductions. For example, looking at utilities or looking at research compliance or looking at safety. There's certain things that we just we so-called protect in this environment. And we'll look very carefully at all units to sort of look at which areas that we want to and need to do these budget reductions. We did ask all the units through their hiring guidelines to look at a possibility of a 10% budget reduction, and all the units were very carefully when they put their hiring guidelines together, talked about what they would have to do along those lines. Again, we're prioritizing things of student safety and student wellness and faculty wellness and faculty success. And we're going to let the budget model, there are a lot of questions related to the budget model where we continue down the path of the budget model, and we will work with the budget model with the college units. It's allowed for better transparency as the budget model is working, and it really allows us to work more closely with the units. So this is it's a harder process to do selective budget cuts, but we think it's the right approach to take from a strategic standpoint.
Thank you. On a related note, Robert, what are some examples of critical positions that would be eligible to be filled, and who would be reviewing and approving those? Oh, and I think you're still muted.
Let me first of all start by saying that we made a decision very, very early as we began to realize that there were going to be significant financial implications from the COVID-19 pandemic, and started to look at how we could maximize our resources. And one of the things that we established very early was a set of hiring guidelines and principles. Those principles were anchored in I think all of our collective knowledge about what's the most effective way to manage financially through this type of crisis. And I'd just like to add that these hiring principles and guidelines were, I thought, very strategic. And I think the system agreed as well, because ultimately the system adopted our hiring guideline framework for the other two universities in the system as well. So we were very pleased with that. To answer the question more directly, to us, critical positions were positions that align with the following guiding principles, and I won't go through all of them, but the two most critical guiding principles for hiring we decided to call this, it's hiring guiding principles. We didn't use the word freeze. We didn't use the word pause. We will allow positions to continue to be filled, but they have to align with the following guiding principle of number one being central to our mission, that the positions that are being asked to be refilled have to be absolutely core to the mission of teaching, research, and engagement at the university. And unit leaders were asked to look at that in the context of any request to fill a position. And another core principle is they had to align with opportunity areas where we had a potential, where we already had a comparative advantage, or investments in the area that would give us comparative advantage, that would make us stronger as we continue to navigate through this crisis. So the positions in terms of research and innovation positions that are tied to our need to continue to be best in class in terms of how we attend to regulatory compliance, positions that are tied to our core mission of access and affordability and student learning, student outcomes, public engagement. I think public engagement is going to be even more critical as we navigate through COVID-19. It's always been critical. It's going to be even more so in the future. E-learning. We know that there's a very strong desire on many of the collegiate units to start to think strategically about what their staffing needs are to make us continue to be best in class, and e-learning and blended online learning delivery mechanisms. And of course, public safety, healthcare, and campus critical infrastructure are the kind of core areas that we're asking units to think about. And then critically, I'll leave you with this, is that if you identify positions that fall into those categories, the units must be able to demonstrate they have the financial ability to sustain those costs, notwithstanding some of the budgetary adjustments that Paul just walked us through.
Great, thank you. Andreas, the state government recently announced that the University of Illinois system will receive a flat budget, as Paul mentioned in his talk. So why are we even talking about cuts? I know Paul kind of went over it, but can you make sure we drill that one home?
Definitely, Robin. Well, first and foremost, we know, as Paul pointed out, our budget that we receive from the state, the state appropriation that goes to our operations is about 10% of our total budget. A good deal of additional revenue relies upon various other sources of revenue that have their own uncertainties. And therefore, we need to be very careful, given the fact that we are still waiting to see how things are going to play out, to make sure that we have the ability to deal with the consequences of those uncertainties. And even, with the state budget, as you heard from the Chancellor, as you heard from Paul, there is uncertainty at what the state will be able to do as they try to deliver on what I believe is a noble desire to make sure that they keep the budget flat for the next year. Let us not forget that state unemployment in the month of April was up to 16%, and with hundreds of thousands of people out of a job, and with uncertainties about how the federal government will continue providing stimulus for the states, the state has a responsibility to look after the well-being of everyone. And we are a partner of the state in looking after the well-being of everyone, and everything that we can do to make sure that we have the fiscal responsibility and discipline to work with them to protect not only our well-being, but the well-being of others in the state, is something that dictates the way we go about our fiscal planning for FY21.
Are there any specific risks with capital planning funding?
Of course, there are risks with capital planning as well. And, this is something that we are following very closely, because especially Now we were very excited about, for example, I was extremely excited not only about the state's commitment to the Discovery Partners Institute and the impact that this will have through our university and partnership with others on the entire state, but also I was very excited about their Connect Illinois initiative in the Capitol bill, close to $500 million that the governor was using to direct the private sector and everyone else who could contribute to that, to providing connectivity to every household across the state of Illinois, in particular downstate. And this COVID-19 crisis has exposed the significance of having that connectivity. And I will tell you that I keep my fingers crossed. Actually, I would say that I'm almost confident that the state will deliver on that commitment because it is needed so much now. And all of us at the University of Illinois have been planning ahead of how to contribute to telehealth, education through this Connect Illinois initiative. And I do believe these are some of the capital projects that have to be not only supported, but prioritized as we move forward.
Thank you. And Robert, we get this question a lot, I know. What about the endowment? Can't you just use that when you have a budget challenge?
No, Robert, well, I'm afraid it doesn't work that way in terms of endowments. I think all of you know we are very blessed to have an endowment in excess of $2 billion. We have the With Illinois campaign that we've aggressively implemented and quite successfully to raise an additional $2.25 billion. And I'm very pleased that notwithstanding the pandemic, we are reaching our target goal for fundraising for this year. And we're sitting at about more than 90% toward our $2.25 billion campaign goal. But the challenge is that when people think about endowments, I think there's a failure to sometimes recognize that these gifts are restricted for the most part by donor intent. And so we don't have a lot of flexibility if a gift is intended to support the Illinois commitment or the Illinois promise or some other entity within the university. We have very little flexibility to, basically no flexibility to utilize those resources. And we're absolutely committed to honoring donor intent. And I think it's important to demonstrate that from a donor relationship perspective, that we honor those intentions to the nth degree and to the letter of the agreement. However, we do have a bit of money that's flexible that we can utilize that is basically unrestricted. And we're very, very fortunate in the last couple of years to have two what we call unicorn gifts. Some of the largest gifts in the history of the university have been unrestricted, which gives us a lot more flexibility about how those funds are used. But I remind people less than 2% of our endowment portfolio falls into that unrestricted category. So we have some barriers and some limitations around how we utilize that money. But I can tell you, we are utilizing it when it is most appropriate to do so. Contacting donors if there might be an interest in redirecting their efforts or thinking about new efforts that meet some of our contemporary needs. And one of the ways we've been doing that of late has to do with the fundraising campaign effort to support our students who are having financial difficulties because of COVID-19. And so we'll continue to think about how do we utilize our endowment resources to help maintain the excellence in our mission. But I can tell you most donors are basically not interested in bailing the university out of a financial crisis, particularly if it's tied to, it's different with this pandemic, but if it's tied to a decline in state support, they're not very willing to give in those kinds of cases, and we understand why. But I think we have a very robust fundraising effort. And in each and every conversation I have with the foundation and with Barry Benson, I am very, very much encouraged that this pandemic has provided new innovative ways for our alumni to think about how they can support the institution. And so we plan to grow that part of the portfolio.
Great. And Andres, Robert just mentioned some efforts to redirect funding to help students. What all is being done to help protect students from the impacts of COVID-19 and the financial issues?
Paul already mentioned the commitment we are making in terms of financial aid and how we direct funding to our students. We did that this past spring and over the summer to deal with the shock to the system that the crisis created. But we are looking ahead into the next year, and am I glad we have established the Illinois commitment. I know it is making a significant difference in many of the students who are looking forward to being part with us next year, but because of the change in their financial status, because of the COVID-19 crisis, we're becoming worried. And we have extended to them the opportunity to let us know about changes in their families' financial well-being as we consider what support they will need for the next year to be able to be with us. So financial aid is working very hard to make sure that as students reach out to us with changes in their status, we are able to respond as best as we can. And we are committed to the students. And you know, I want to take advantage of this opportunity, Robin, to mention that these are the students we know. These are the students we know are part of our university. They're coming back to us, or they're starting with us next year. But I want to also point out the fact that there is a cohort of students, which is, I think, significantly large, that is composed of those individuals who lost jobs, who are out of work, and who are looking for opportunities to reskill themselves, or looking for opportunities to deal with this, the impact of the loss of a job has on their family. And this is why I want to go back to the Discovery Partners Institute and what we are doing with regard to how can we help those have opportunities to reskill during the pandemic. And we are fortunate to have had a very strong program online that provides opportunities for coursework to be made available to the citizens of the state of Illinois, and those who are not our traditional students, those who we never thought of them as students right now, are going to be benefiting from that coursework that we'll be making available to them. So I would say not only are we looking after our students and how to support them through this financial crisis, and how to make sure that the financial challenges we face do not interfere with their ability to continue to learn. We're trying to see how we can expand what we offer to help others who want to be students with the University of Illinois during this crisis.
Great, thank you. And the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a lot of things to be put on hold, that sort of thing. Paul, we had started the integrated and value-centered budgeting model, a year ago, and moving along. Has this caused you to have to rethink that, or is this showing you that it was a good idea to have that in place?
It's a good question, Robin. I think what I would argue, I think it's beneficial for units now, because now they have a roadmap of if certain activities, certain opportunities change, what effect it does have on the budget. And it gives us that a little bit more nimbleness that I was talking about before, of being able to do this. So I think it's been more data are available to the units to look at their budgets. I think it actually be helpful as we navigate this, and I think it's useful for the colleges to be able to utilize that for their long-term plans, which are really essential during this crisis.
So we're an international university, and obviously this pandemic has affected the entire world. Andres, what happens if our international students are not able to get back to campus?
That's a very good question. And of course, there is a financial impact associated with that. But let me say that the number one thing that all of us are thinking about is how do we make sure that our international students are able to continue learning, working with us if they are not able to come back to campus. And we believe that with what we are providing online, we'll be able to engage a good number of them if they are not able to come back. We are talking to some who are our new students, working with them to see how we can make sure as they defer their enrollment with us, they have the opportunity to continue learning as they wait for the time to be back on campus. And finally, let me say that a good number of our international students are actually in the United States. A good number of them did not go back home for the summer. Some of our incoming international students have been already in the United States. So we were waiting to see. Come August, we'll have a very good sense of what percentage of them are able to join us.
Okay, thank you. And Robert, obviously, a lot of our students are attracted here because we have Big Ten Division I athletics. What are the impacts on our athletics programs?
The impact on our athletics program has been significant thus far, and could potentially become even more challenging depending upon what happens initially with football and ultimately with basketball and some of the major revenue generating sport. The abrupt end to the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament definitely had financial implications. There's still unknowns about media revenue, which is a critical part of the budget model for our athletics department. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to remind people, because sometimes there's great confusion about this. The athletic department basically operates based on the revenue that it generates from the different sports and revenue generating sports and other kinds of revenue from media, et cetera. And so it has its own kind of unique set of circumstances. And I think going forward, notwithstanding the flat budget that the governor has talked about, athletics in many ways operates outside of that decision, and will be very dramatically impacted somewhat regardless of what happens this year, because I can say pretty clearly that we are working, as the provost has indicated, to have students back for face-to-face instruction. That is also will have some elements of online instruction in a kind of a hybrid model. I can say that we will only have, for example, a football program this year if students are back on campus. And in either one of those scenarios, the financial implications are going to be great because at this juncture, with the limitations that are being put in place in terms of large gathering, it would require us to have a football season that really adheres to social distancing, which means you wouldn't be able to pack the stadium with 60,000 fans if we're able to play at all. And a lot of this is still being resolved, Robin. We have a Big Ten president and chancellors meeting on Sunday, where a lot of these decisions will be vetted and decisions will be forthcoming. But at this juncture, it's important for folks to know that we have made the decision to bring about 150 of our student athletes back to campus on a voluntary basis, not to begin practice, but to begin training, because you can't have students to start to practice if they haven't had the appropriate conditioning. And so that was vetted, approved not only by NCAA, the Big Ten commissioner, Kevin Warren, and the presidents and chancellors, but our athletic department did an amazing job of crafting a very thorough and thoughtful plan to bring those students back to campus, 150 initially, for training. And it adheres very closely to the principles of protecting their health and safety, as well as the broader community. And it was vetted, and the decision was engaged not only the Illinois Health Department, but the Urbana-Champaign Health Department, The Big Ten has a small group of medical professionals that also approve this kind of strategy. So athletics is probably one of the biggest unknown as it relates to our non-academic programs in terms of what the financial implications will be. And potentially their financial situation could get significantly worse than it is today. But I really must add, I'm very appreciative of the fact that notwithstanding these unknowns, Athletic Director Josh Whitman has not only is he a great AD, he has a very astute financial mind as well, and very grateful that he, along with Coach Smith and along with Coach Underwood, decided to voluntarily participate in the 10% budget reduction to help stand up this fund that is going to be supporting our COVID-19 relief fund for our students. So a lot of unknowns.
Reduction, Chancellor, you mean personal salary cuts?
Personal salary cuts, yes, not budget cuts, personal salary cuts, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. We were supposed to end at 1, but if you can humor me a little bit, we do have a large audience and we have a few more questions to get through. So if we could, let's just keep plowing through. Paul, what about people who are on non-state self-supporting funds?
Basically, we're applying the same guiding principles to the people on non-state funds as we do in the other funds. Those principles apply to all of our employees on different sources of funds. We're committed to supporting all of our employees, and we're closely monitoring because there might be some deficits in some of those units. So we're really closely monitoring those entities as well.
Great, thank you. And obviously, we've all gotten sort of in a routine of working remotely, those of us who are able to do so. Andreas, are you thinking at all about having people continue to work remotely if they can? Are there any financial advantages to that?
Well, first of all, let me say, Robin, that as you know very well, we're, as the state has relaxed the shelter in place directive, and we're thinking about our return to work, we're being very cautious. Again, you know, the safety and wellness of everyone is our #1 priority, and we are taking our time to make sure that as we progress toward the state where we as a university can provide the processes, the protocols in terms of testing and tracing individuals who get infected and connecting them with their healthcare provider and following up with them. Once I'm convinced that we have the best protocol in the nation available to us, I will be very cautious. And I know Chancellor Jones is a full believer in the ability of our SHIELD team to put together something that is amazingly pioneering in the way we think about the safety of the community. Having said that, we do see the fact that many of the things that perhaps more in the private sector than an academic environment are becoming the trend in terms of working remotely are relevant to our environment as well. You have heard me say in the past, I don't see how anyone can get educated and become a responsible, productive adult without being surrounded by great men and women that serve as mentors and advisors. But when it comes to some of the services we offer, if you wish, centrally, it's becoming very clear that we need to be thinking much more creatively and forward in terms of how we can rethink them, in terms of where we employ people and how we leverage all of those things to improve our not only our service to the students and the academic mission and the research mission, but primarily also savings in terms of facilities, utilities, and so on. I know that Paul has already been looking into it with his team, and I'm sure he has some thoughts to share with us about this.
Did you want to add anything there, Paul? Or?
No, again, our goal 4 of, if you go back to our goal 4 of our strategic plan, was to look at these things and becoming more financially efficient as we move forward. So I think it's very consistent in terms of what we were already thinking about prior to this, and this really gives us an opportunity to look a little bit more aggressively about these kind of opportunities that Andreas had talked about.
Okay. Another question we've gotten frequently is, what about travel rules? What are examples of travel that will be allowed, and what are things that are going to have to be on the shelf for a while?
Colleges have already looked and developed their own internal rules related to travel and that as well. For example, we went back and even looked at what our travel expenses were a year ago compared to what they were in April. And we reduced our expenditure almost $500,000 over this last April. So the colleges themselves are monitoring this very carefully, and they've been very strategic about this. We're not, just like we're not freezing hiring, we're not freezing travel. There's many things that need to be done through travel. Good examples would be things with many grant activities really encourage us to or require us to do grant and travel activity.
Okay. Paul, there are units that have had challenges, have had problems financially even before COVID. Will units that have deficit reduction plans in place be allowed to reassess those and defer, or at least expand the timeline?
Yeah, my office is working very carefully with all these units. We have a dedicated process to deal with deficit and deficit reduction plans, and we will re-review all of those considering the new financial circumstances and work with each one of those units to revise those plans. And as I stated before, we have to be nimble and innovative and flexible as we navigate this crisis.
Great. And I think we're, obviously out of time. We did have one more question that I'd like to get to, kind of a forward-looking one. Andreas, how and when will you evaluate the plan's success, and when might you look at, changing course and reevaluating any of it?
Well, Robin, the truth is that we are evaluating the plan on a weekly basis. It is one of those things, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is not a crisis that anyone was expecting. Paul talked about, financial analysts want to put together plans, and that's great. But what is happening is, right now we have been punched in the mouth, and we are revisiting our plan right away. And we are putting together, if you wish, a plan that is guided by the realities as they evolve over time. And those realities are many. The financial well-being of the state. Let me start with our neighborhood. The financial well-being of the community, the safety and the wellness of the community. Are we making progress as a community? The governor's directive in terms of the Restore Illinois plan is very well defined. There are metrics that we need to follow. Those are part of our plan. But coming back to the financial plan, I want you to keep in mind that we are going to be revisiting the plan with the leadership of all units across the campus on a weekly, monthly basis, because at the end of the day, as Paul said, as the Chancellor said, we need to be very nimble. We are going to be dealing with uncertainty for a while. We cannot afford to allow this uncertainty to undermine the #1 priority that we have. We are, I believe, and I have seen it, we are one of the most important contributors to the ability of the state of Illinois to think about how to manage this pandemic. And, I know that all of us feel that we need to continue doing that. We need to continue educating people. We need to continue providing the guidance in terms of research, in terms of processes, in terms of understanding, from the economy all the way to the way, as I mentioned, you connect Illinois to provide access to every household around the state. These are the kinds of things that are expected from the flagship university, and that's why we need to keep at planning on a weekly basis.
Sounds like a great way to conclude the Q&A. Thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you. Robert, would you have any final thoughts you'd like to share related to our budget and financial status?
Just briefly, let me just say that not any additional thoughts. I think the questions have been quite comprehensive and very, very thoughtful. I just want to thank everyone that is taking time out of their schedule to participate. And these briefings are the embodiment of what we promised you as an ongoing part of the normal operation of this university, and that is to be truthful and to be transparent in everything that we do, and that we very much value the shared governance structure that we've developed here. We very much value the transparency, the engagement that all of us operationalize as we collectively think about and collectively manage the resources of this university. It has served us well and over the last decades, and I can assure you it will serve us well in the future. So again, thank you so much. And we look forward to continue to get engaged with you as we move this university through this crisis and to the next level of excellence. Because I can tell you, from my perspective, universities, higher education institutions like ours are going to be needed even more in the future than they have in the past, particularly around the challenging issues that we face with this pandemic and some of the other contemporary issues of societal injustices that are plaguing our communities at the moment. We have to be part of the solution for not only for the state of Illinois, but for the nation and for the world. So thank you for participating, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thanks to all three of our panelists for joining us in this first COVID-19 briefing series. Once again, the next briefing in the series will be Tuesday, June 9th at noon. That one will be focused on the draft report by the academics team discussing the possible scenarios for fall instruction. Chancellor Jones and Provost Cangelaris will be back for that one. They'll be joined by Vice Provost Kevin Pitts and Vice Provost Phil Bernard. Again, you'll be able to watch that briefing using that same link that you're using today. And all of the briefings we conduct this summer will be recorded